So today we're going to talk about slavery in the colonies. So we're going to start by watching these two videos. So let's go ahead and start watching those.
The slave trade was not just a trade in humans, there was a lot more to it. Ships would sail south from Liverpool and Bristol loaded with goods that were highly sought after in Africa, such as pots, pans, guns, and ammunition. Then it would call into ports in France and Portugal to purchase more goods, such as wines and brandy. Now, when a ship's captain reached Africa, he would sell all these goods and then rearrange his ship ready to buy his new cargo, slaves. The ship will be refitted to take as many as 400 slaves, all lying down in rows, deck after deck. Once the ship was ready, the slaves would be bought and loaded, a process that could sometimes take weeks. The ship would then sail across the Atlantic Ocean to the West Indies. This was known as the Middle Passage. In the West Indies, the slaves were sold, and the ship was loaded with cargo such as tobacco, sugar, and cotton, and set sail again for the final leg of the voyage back to England to complete the slave triangle.
Okay, so that was our first video, and here is our second one.
We lived like that for a week before we set sail, chained to the deck, no room to move. There was a bucket for the toilet, which I could just about reach. But some weren't so lucky. They had to lie in their own waste. It was so hot, and the air was bad, but the worst was yet to come. When we set sail, the swaying of the ship made many of us seasick, and the smell just got worse. But whilst at sea, we were at least taken up on the deck most days, in the fresh air, and made to walk around. We were at sea for about 20 days when seasickness struck. Dysentery. Men lay in their own filth and died chained together. We were forced to carry the dead up to the deck and throw them overboard. Sharks followed, and they followed the ship and tore into the bodies as soon as they hit the sea. But they stopped using slaves to move the dead after a group of men jumped overboard. It seems they'd have rather died than become a slave.
Okay, so we watched those two videos, and now we're going to watch a brain pop, and then we're going to go over the quiz. So let me put that on for you.
What? I'm working on my report for Mrs. Baxter. Why? Dear Tim and Moby, I want to know about the history of slavery in America. From Dwight. Unfortunately, slavery's history goes back to way before the United States even existed. Early records show that people were enslaved thousands of years ago in places like Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. Even the ancient Greeks, the inventors of democracy, used enslaved people as household servants. In the Americas, slavery was particularly brutal. Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors enslaved the native people who lived in Mexico and South America. Oh, conquistador means conqueror in Spanish. The British and Spanish colonists in North America enslaved native people there too. But in the British colonies on the East Coast, they quickly shifted to enslaving people from Africa. Beginning in the early 1600s, Africans were used for household help and farm work in North America. And the southern colonies built their whole economy around a slave workforce. They labored growing cotton, indigo, and sugar on large farms called plantations, while northern colonies became more industrial, so they needed far fewer workers. By the end of the 18th century, the African slave trade had stolen millions of people and shipped them to North America. The slave trade was a big international business. In Africa, people were kidnapped and traded to merchants in exchange for European goods. They were then sent to the Americas, where they were forced to work on plantations. The crops they grew were sent back to Europe, where they were sold and manufactured into goods. The system was called the triangular trade, and the leg between Africa and the Americas is known as the Middle Passage. People were chained together and packed like livestock into cargo holds. They often couldn't move at all, not even to go to the bathroom. Many got sick and died. Others tried to starve themselves or jump overboard to escape. Over 15% of the captives perished while on board. For those who survived, the excruciating journey took months. The first stop was the West Indies, islands in the Caribbean. Some enslaved people were kept there as plantation workers. Others were sent to America, where they were sold at auctions. Families were broken up and sold to different planters. Well, back then many Americans thought that Africans were inferior people. They were judged because their skin was a different color and because they weren't Christians. Greed was a factor too. Free labor made a lot of people very rich. Enslaved workers had no rights at all. Plantation owners could make them work all day without rest, beat them, and even kill them. It was all legal. You said it. But eventually, things did begin to change. In 1808, bringing slaves over from Africa was outlawed. Of course, there were millions of Africans here already, and laws had been passed to make slavery hereditary. That meant any children of enslaved people were enslaved too. So the system actually expanded as generations of children were born into slavery. But by the 1850s, most northern states had outlawed the practice. In 1860, the U.S. fought a civil war over slavery, which brought it to an end. During the war, Abraham Lincoln delivered the Emancipation Proclamation. He declared that all enslaved people in Confederate states were now free. And the 13th Amendment to the Constitution officially outlawed slavery in 1865. But the effects of slavery didn't end overnight. African Americans were treated as second-class citizens for the next 100 years. The civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s made huge strides toward righting those injustices. Since then, we've made a lot of progress, but we still have a way to go. It's up to all of us to work toward a society that treats people fairly, no matter our race or background. We're all just people, you know? You're people too, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, so you can go on here in a little bit and take the quiz, which is right here. And there's a review and a graded quiz. So you could do the graded quiz, send it in, take a picture. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do today is we're going to listen to My World, pages 180 to 181, and then after that you'll do the discussion. So let's go ahead and listen to the pages. Here it is. 180 and 181.
Lesson 3. Slavery in the colonies. I will know how slavery developed in the United States. Vocabulary. Slavery. Middle Passage. Uprising. Enslaved people captured in Western Africa brought some of their culture and language to the Americas. Draw a picture to illustrate one of these words of African origin. Banjo, gumbo, jazz, cola, tote, jumbo. In the summer of 1619, a Dutch ship carrying cargo that included a group of Africans landed at Jamestown. Local residents bartered for these Africans and put them to work. They were not paid and received only food and shelter for their work. A few may have gained their freedom after some time. Within a few years, new laws were passed in Virginia and Massachusetts that took away all rights from African servants. Slavery, a system in which people are bought and sold as if they were property, had begun in the English colonies. The slave trade. What began that summer soon grew into a large and horrifying business. Many groups of people have been enslaved throughout history, often as a result of war. In the growing colonies, however, workers were wanted. Indentured servants met part of this need, agreeing to work for a time. Enslaved Africans, however, made no such agreement. They were captured and taken against their will without hope of freedom. At first, enslaved people came mostly from the western part of Africa. Other Africans captured them, marching the captives to the coast where European traders waited in ships. In return for human captives, the Europeans offered guns and other goods. The African captors used the guns to enslave more people. Next came the terrifying journey to the Americas. This was called the Middle Passage. The captured Africans were packed into boats. They were chained together, body to body, in the cargo holds. With little room to stand or stretch, they lay in darkness for weeks and months. Frightened and hungry, many people became sick and did not survive the trip. Many others wished they had died and were jealous of those who no longer had to suffer. As one survivor of the Middle Passage wrote about those who had died, I envied them the freedom they enjoyed, and as often wished I could change my condition for theirs. Olaudah Equiano. 1. Main ideas and details. Write 2 additional details that support the main idea.
So the last thing you're going to do is do the discussion, and you can answer at least 3 of these questions. Have a great day.